is doing a wonderful job.
Now on Indianapolis This Week, taking the governor to court. The lawsuit over Indiana's stance, blocking Syrian refugees from coming to the Hoosier State. Will it force a change in policy? Calling for Change, the new program launching this week, designed to help police solve more homicides in the city and get witnesses to come forward. And honoring an Indiana legend, our Sunday Spotlight on Lee Hamilton.
RTV6, the Indy Channel. This is Indianapolis This Week with Rafael Sanchez.
Thank you for joining us for Indianapolis This Week. We hope that you're having a great Thanksgiving weekend. We start today with the new focus on homicides in Indianapolis after a week of coverage dominated by the murder of Amanda Blackburn. Authorities on Monday announcing the arrest of 2 people charged in her murder, but also answering questions about police handling of homicides in the city and questions about whether the Blackburn case received special treatment from investigators.
I think it's unfortunate that there is a perception that we in public safety would care about one crime over another, which is simply not the truth. Certainly from our office perspective, from a police agency perspective, we take every single crime seriously.
I think it's unfair to characteristically say that the community doesn't help us, because we had a 30% increase in Crime Stopper tips alone. But what we're saying is, don't stop. Keep calling, keep making us aware. We have a great prosecutor, great team doing their work, but now we have to have community come forth and provide additional information.
We just heard from Police Chief Rick Hyde about ending the code of silence, and joining us now on the program are the Reverends Charles Harrison and Charles Ellis. Welcome to the program. You're going to kick off a campaign next week to end the silence. What does that really mean?
Well, we really have to address what has been a prevailing problem in our community, and that is homicides that are being committed, and people who have knowledge of those homicides, whether it be family members or the perpetrators or friends, not coming forth and providing the information, so that we have a lot of these homicides that go cold and unsolved. And we need to break that code of silence, or what they call snitching out there. That one OG said to me that what goes on the street stays in the street. And we cannot have that kind of mindset in our community, that what happens in the street stays in the streets. But we need people to come forward, because it's morally right for them to come forward and provide information to the police, so that the victims of these homicides can have justice, their families.
Reverend Ellis, there are 50 open homicide cases. So how will this campaign work this time? How will you change attitudes? How will you get people to talk?
Of course, changing attitudes is difficult at the root, and you got to get the people kind of at the DNA level. But nevertheless, we need to have this conversation. And really, I think, Raphael, it comes from an attitude of the police are our enemy, and we don't want to help our enemy. So it's kind of the idea, well, at least I'm not going to help the enemy. And we know, just even from current events and the Black Lives Matter movement, we know that there have been problems with police departments all across the country. And certainly there are some police that should not be police officers, which is another issue. But you can't paint the brush wide like that, you know, no more than you can paint the brush and say all African Americans are criminals. You know, we wouldn't want people to paint. So that aside, we have to really get in and think about who are the enemies, really the enemies. It's the people that are committing carnage in our community. Those are the ones that are enemies of our community. And so we have to, you know, be clear about that.
So how will you be clear? Tell me how this will work. Are you going to go into the streets? Are you going to tell people to just start talking? I mean, how will this be different starting next week?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to hold a press conference, and we're going to highlight some high-profile homicides with family members there. We're bringing together community leaders all over the community, pastors, and begin to talk about these particular homicides that have been high-profile, particularly the Deshaun Swanson homicide, the 10-year-old who was innocently killed. We need people to come forward who have knowledge of that. The 2 teenage girls that were killed in the Hallville area, no one has come forward yet the quadruple homicide in the Unwhy area where 4 people were killed. No one has come forward and provided information. There are several.
Isn't there fear? Some people may be afraid.
Yeah, and that's legitimate.
I know the word we use is snitching, but it may not even be about snitching. It may be that they're afraid to call 911 because of what could happen.
It's legitimate. It's legitimate, and we certainly want to be sensitive to people and their personal safety. But we know that there's things that are set up and to be anonymous, and you can say something or
Crime Stoppers,
and you can say, and you'd be surprised. We had a meeting just the other night with the forensic lab, and they were talking to us about what they do on homicide scenes, since we're on so many homicide scenes. And it's a company, a private company, independent company actually, and just the slightest, sometimes just the slightest bit of information, the slightest thread, the slightest can turn an investigation around. So even if it seems insignificant to say, hey, you know, I saw this, you know, those things can be important in the context of building a case and saying, hey, we think we got the right person. And so we want to just kind of encourage, and I think it's like a ball rolling down a hill. You just got to get it rolling and get some people that are willing to share. And here's the other thing, you know, the idea of it snitching or telling or helping the police, it's always that until it touches your family.
That's right.
Then when it touches your family, it's no longer snitching. It's somebody should tell, somebody saw something, somebody should say, and you can't wait for it to touch your family. And here's the reality. If you don't begin to share, it will touch your family.
That's right.
And so that's the message that we're really sharing.
It is time to end the violence. We want to thank the Reverends Ellis, Reverend Harrison. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
A story that we'll cover on Wednesday. Also coming up next, suing the state of Indiana over the governor's decision to block Syrian refugees from the state. We go one-on-one with the ACLU next. You're watching Indianapolis This Week on RTV6. Allowing Syrian refugees to relocate to Indiana, a fight that may now move into a federal courtroom. The ACLU suing Governor Pence in that suit, claiming the move to prevent refugees from coming to Indiana, in their words, is illegal, going so far as to call it a constitutional bluff. Let's get more on this developing story with RTV6's State House reporter, Katie Hines.
Ken Falk with the ACLU joining us this morning. Ken, good to see you. Thank you for your time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Is it within the governor's purview to pause the resettlement program for Syrian refugees?
No, for a number of reasons. First of all, immigration and refugee resettlement under the Constitution and laws of the United States are given exclusively to the federal government. States simply cannot decide immigration policy, and that's sort of what the governor is doing. Secondly, the governor is picking and choosing which immigrants and refugees he wants to admit based on their nationality. That's a clear violation of both equal protection and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits the states from discriminating against people based on nationality.
We read in the court filing that 19 more Syrian refugees are in the pipeline to come here to Indiana in the next several months. What's at stake?
Well, I think a lot is at stake. Obviously, these are persons who have been extensively vetted by the federal government, who have left horrible circumstances and are seeking new lives here in the United States. And for the governor or governors to assert the power to pick and choose who they want to let into the state, I think has ramifications all over the place.
Does the Constitution apply to refugees?
Well, certainly the Constitution applies to refugees, and in fact, case law is quite clear that if persons are here with the permission and blessing of the federal government, they are entitled to full protection, and that the state simply cannot discriminate against them in this way.
Do you expect the ACLU to file similar lawsuits in other states where we've seen governors take similar action?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm only concerned with Indiana, but I've heard that there's planned litigation from other organizations throughout the country, since obviously Governor Pence is not unique in doing this.
The governor says that he's pausing the resettlement program until the federal government can address security gaps, he says, that were acknowledged by the FBI. Last week we saw the U.S. House vote to halt the program. What do you think about stricter screening and requirements specifically for Syrian refugees at the federal level?
Well, I don't have any thoughts about it because this is a federal decision. That's the whole point of our litigation. If Congress and the federal government feels the need to react differently, then they need to react differently. But it's not up to the governor or the mayors or other people other than the federal government to decide who they're going to accept and not accept.
Governor's office is questioning whether you have the right to take this to court. How do you respond?
Well, clearly, we're representing a refugee group that is being hurt by this. It's a refugee group that works with these refugees and receives funding from the federal government that's passed through the state. The state is now saying, basically, we're not going to give you the funding that we, the state, have already committed to give you, and that certainly is hurting them. Plus, they are being able to raise some of the issues that the refugees themselves could raise.
What has the governor's decision meant to refugees and also to the group Exodus Refugee Immigration?
Well, I can't speak for refugees. I can certainly speak to the group. I mean, this is a not-for-profit that is doing immensely important work in resettling refugees, and the idea that we're going to threaten their funding over this, I think, is really disturbing. I imagine from the refugee standpoint, the last thing that families need after leaving the horror of Syria and spending the last 2 years or more being vetted by the federal government is to come to some other place where they find that somehow more roadblocks are being placed in their way.
What action would you like to see from the court and a federal judge?
Well, what we're asking the federal judge to do is to declare that what the governor is doing is unlawful and to enjoin or require the state to fulfill its obligations to treat these refugees the same way we treat all refugees.
And what will your client do in the meantime?
Well, in the meantime, they're going to persevere, and hopefully their funding, hopefully we'll be able to get an injunction before their funding takes a big hit, but they will persevere and they will continue to do really, really important work in resettling persons.
Ken, thank you for your time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Katie, thank you so much. We did reach out to the governor's office. As well, his spokesperson say that the governor believes caution and compassion are not mutually exclusive. The statement goes on to say that the governor is confident that he has the authority to suspend the state's participation in the resettlement of Syrian refugees in Indiana and will not reverse course until the administration and Congress take action to pause this program and implement measures necessary to address security gaps acknowledged by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. When we come back, our insiders join the discussion over Syria and much more. You're watching Indianapolis This Week on RTV6. Political insiders Abdul Hakim Shabazz and Adam Kirsch, the issue of the governor and the Syrian refugees.
Well, first of all, a couple of things. Looking at the governor's case, I don't think they have the legal authority to block Syrian refugees from coming to Indiana. Now, with that said, I think they're well within their right to express their concern about who is coming into the state of Indiana in the wake of recent events that we've seen overseas. And going to the ACL lawsuit and Ken Falk and those guys, I do not think they have the legal standing to file a lawsuit because only people who are actual refugees of the clients they're representing don't fit that category. So a legal issue, not necessarily. I think this is more of a political issue, but I think the governor wins the political fight because if you ask the average Hoosier on the street, no, should we be letting in people in Indiana who have not been properly or securely vetted, they will all say no.
Well, that's just the first we're going to say, yes, the governor does not have legal standing. The immigration is solely the purview of the federal government. So what he's doing is a political issue or a moral issue, and I think he's wrong on it. Fundamentally, refugees are among the most vetted, if not the most vetted, foreign nationals who set foot on American soil. They're vetted for 18 to 24 months before they come here. If we've got security concerns, maybe we should look at tourism visas, business visas, etc. Refugees are not a security threat to the United States, and it only serves to further ISIS or Daesh's ability to confront America versus the world. We should be welcoming refugees trying to escape a incredibly dangerous environment, and instead we're again closing down Hoosier hospitality, and it's wrong.
People are conflicted on this issue. I think for the most part, people want to be welcoming, right? People want to see people who are wanting to leave a war-torn area come to America, but they're conflicted on this issue after what we saw in Mali and what we saw in France.
Yes, and also...
so how do you balance that? Because I think we don't want to demonize people, right? I think people have a right to ask.
No, I don't think you want to demonize people, but I do think it never hurts to just press the pause button to go ahead and make sure that your vetting processes are working, because even members of the Obama administration have said, no, they can't guarantee, that the vetting process we use won't let somebody slip through the cracks.
Well, what we're saying is, again, refugees are among the most vetted foreign nationals to set foot in America. I think that to say what happened, the tragedy that happened in Paris is why we need to pause Syrian refugees. The attackers in Paris weren't Syrian and they weren't refugees. This doesn't, the two things don't have anything to do with each other. I think it's political posturing, quite frankly, because Mike Pence will do anything right now to not talk about opposition to civil rights, not talk about crumbling infrastructure. And he's picked one that's another bad issue for him.
So if it's such a bad issue, why does John Gregg agree with him? I mean, John Gregg put out a statement basically saying that he trusts the governor's judgment, on the decision to deal with refugees from Syria. So how is it bad? So apparently your gubernatorial candidate, your standard bearer, that your party has come out and endorsed for governor, agrees with Mike Pence on this issue.
I don't agree with Mike Pence on this issue. I think that clearly we need to, Indiana has had a history of being welcoming, and this governor has put that on the back burner several times now. And it's interesting, every time you see Governor Pence say something, he always starts with Indiana is a welcoming place, and then says things that are not welcoming. It's
But Indiana is not alone. There are a number of other states that are also taking the same measure. Not to compare us to those other states, but other governors, who, for the majority, are Republicans. One Democrat, I believe it's New Hampshire, who's opposed to the administration's refugee position, are speaking out because they are concerned.
Right, and even the Congress, by a bipartisan vote, said, hey, we need to sort of revamp and relook at the way we do this. Nobody wants Syrian people in Syria to be subject to ISIS terrorists, but we want to make sure that people we let into the country, it is safe and secure, because our job is to protect Americans first.
Let's talk about this poll out this week. All 100 senators are now home for the Thanksgiving weekend. The poll from Morning Consult showing that both Joe Donnelly, the Democrat, and Dan Coats, the Republican, among 31 senators with a below 50% approval rating in their home state. That may be a good number considering that this is a split state. We have a D and an R in office, right?
We do. I think they were both high 40s in approval and low 20s in disapproval. Quite frankly, I think Hoosiers tend to be pragmatists, tend to want things to get done, and quite frankly, not a lot's getting done in Washington, which is, I think, is responsible for both of their soft approval ratings. What was interesting to me is the same poll sample had a 40-something% disapproval for Mike Pence and a 20-something disapproval for the senators. So either they don't know as much about the senators as they do the governor, or they certainly don't dislike their senators as much as they dislike the governor.
And also, if you think of Congress as a whole, its approval rate is usually about 8 or 9%, or maybe 10%. More people believe in Bigfoot than think Congress is doing a good job. I mean, I think the fact that both Joe Donnelly and Dan Coats are in sort of that upper high 40s, speaks well. I won't necessarily use my old analogy, just like being valedictorian in summer school, but when you get at least 40-something% of your people like you in a body that only gets about 12% approval rating, you're not doing too bad.
I see the Thanksgiving leftovers are talking.
Those jokes went over well at the dinner table on Thursday, I tell you.
Abdul and Adam, thank you so much. The debate continues on Twitter right now and really all the time. While you're there, follow our official Twitter account @IndyThisWeek for news and updates every day of the week. He is one of Indiana's best-known politicians around the world. And now Lee Hamilton receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom. We'll talk to him about the refugee crisis and the fight against ISIS next. You're watching Indianapolis This Week on RTV6. Get a politics, Lee Hamilton, the longtime member of Congress from Southern Indiana, getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom this week. Hamilton served for 34 years in the House of Representatives and is considered one of the country's leading experts on international affairs. President Obama calls him a faithful servant to his beloved Indiana.
He helped guide us through the Cold War and into a new era of American leadership. A man widely admired on both sides of the aisle for his honesty, his wisdom, and consistent commitment to bipartisanship. From serving as vice chair of the 9/11 Commission to making Congress more effective, Lee remains a tireless public servant and a trusted advisor and friend to many, and I am proud to count myself among them.
Just before his trip to Washington, we sat down with Lee Hamilton to talk about Syria and the fight against ISIS.
The Syrian civil war is at the root of the migration problem. We cannot duck our heads in the sand and say, back away from trying to resolve the Syrian civil war. I don't want to shut people out. Now, obviously, you got to pay attention to security. Vetting is not easy to do. These Syrian refugees do not have a clear record. They don't have a high school diploma, they don't have a track record, so it's not an easy task, but it should be done. I don't want to rub out the inscription under the Statue of Liberty. That expresses America at its best. ISIL does not represent an existential threat to the United States. They're not going to take over New York City. They're not going to take over Bloomington, Indiana. Are they a threat? Of course they are. Are they a serious threat? Yes, indeed. Do we have to pay attention to them? We certainly do. And we have to take aggressive steps, for example, to deny them a safe haven, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria. We must not panic about the Islamic State. Their message is absolutely horrible. They kill people indiscriminately. Their record of governing is abhorrent. Our message has so much attraction and positive features to it, treating people decently, freedom, liberty, and justice for all. We're going to win this. There isn't any doubt we're going to win it. So let's emphasize the positive features. Our counterterrorism policy has relied very heavily on the military for understandable reasons. It's a powerful tool. It's available to a president right now. It can stabilize the situation very quickly, but it cannot win the war on ideas. And so we have to begin to exercise soft power, diplomacy, development, and take them on in the war on ideas.
Our congratulations again to Lee Hamilton and to Indianapolis native Bill Ruckelshaus, who also received a Presidential Medal of Freedom on Tuesday for his service to the EPA and the environment. For Katie, Jason, and the entire RTV6 News team, thank you for watching, and have a great Thanksgiving weekend.